not everybody is so familiar with, your Jason's double life, because you will know him as the man who leads our meditations and does the door. But in the wider world, Jason is very much involved with the media. He is a video editor, won an Emmy a few years ago. And when you watch programs like Panorama or Dispatches or lots of documentaries, if you watch the credits carefully, you may occasionally see this man's name rolling up because Jason is right there in the thick of it in the world of multimedia. And therefore, for someone to have what we would quaintly call here alternative views and also be in the mass media, that is something, of course, which is very helpful because someone like Jason has insights. He knows what really goes on at the core of it. And he's been much involved with everything from crop circles to spiritual research over the years. And what he's going to try to do for you now is set the scene for this weekend. Or if you're just here for today, set the scene for today. And he's going to cover a lot of ground and put the big picture of 2012 and all that and beyond. So please give a huge hand for Jason Porthouse.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hello. It's 2012. Yay. We've made it. It's my happy 2012 dance. We're all going to die. It's an apocalypse. No, it's not, is it? I've called this talk Always in the Shift. Are there any Latin scholars in the audience? Thank God for that. This came from a friend of mine whose motto on his coat of arms is that. I guess you can figure that one out for yourself. I thought I would just change the letter slightly. And I think that's quite apposite for the times we're living in. So what I wanted to do was just maybe have a little run through. Who here is familiar with the prophecies around 2012? So there's most of you. Okay, there's a bit, and who isn't? Who hasn't? Is it anyone this is completely new to? No, that's good. Okay. But I thought it'd be worthwhile to actually have a little run through some of the main ideas and some of the sort of prophecies that are around 2012, and then try and tie them in with some of what's going on globally and where I think we need to be and where we're heading towards. So I suppose the start for me about the whole awareness of 2012 was when a rather handsome chap with interesting footwear came up to me in the Sussex group and gave me this little pamphlet. That was Jeff Stray, and it was quite a few years ago. And he'd been sort of researching the whole 2012 phenomenon. It is now a slightly bigger pamphlet. If any of you haven't got this book, why not? You need it. You've got 6 months to read it. Gen up. No, less than that, isn't it now? I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. It's the definitive guide, basically. And I'm not going into any depth about this. I'm just going to, like a skimming stone across the surface with these things. But the thing that started it all, really, is the idea that the Mayans, their civilization, their calendar system, it's the end of the long count calendar. I'm not going to go into all the technicalities about what that means. It's in the book, and other people will no doubt talk about it this weekend. But on the 21st of December, 2012, their long count calendar ends. It's the end of the fourth world in their mythology and the beginning of the fifth world. They don't say a lot more about it than that, but there were a couple of little extra bits of information that started to make people wonder if there was more to this than just a continuation of a calendar cycle. The Jaguar priests, Chilambalam, there was a prophecy that actually stated about the end of the world and mentioned that people would lose faith in their governments and wouldn't trust their governments anymore. So that started to get people excited. And then in Tortuguero, somebody found one of the stone tablets there, and in the inscription on it, even though it's rather annoyingly worn away on one side, so we don't quite know what's going to happen, it talks about the idea of the return of the 9 gods. And then it's like somebody's ripped the page, and we don't quite know where that's going to end up. Frustrating. But it's not just the Mayans that had these ideas about 2012 as an end date. The I Ching, the Chinese numerical divination calendrical system. In the 70s, Terence McKenna, after taking rather a lot of sacred hallucinogens, started coming up with the idea that the I Ching represented a time wave, a fractal time wave. And this time wave, when they started to look at it, it started to coincide with certain key events in history. And as you can see, you probably can't read it there, but he talks about the ingression of novelty, of new ideas coming into the world consciousness. And there are certain peaks and troughs within that time wave that correspond to happenings. And he used the explosion of the atomic bombs in the Second World War to line them up originally. And the interesting thing is, on the 21st of December 2012, all of these waves conjoin and peak. This maximum ingression of novelty. It's like there's this explosion of consciousness, and all these amazing things start to happen as novelty goes off the scale. The Hopi have their own prophetic ideas about 2012. In their calendar system, the fifth world starts on the 23rd of December 2012. It's heralded by the appearance of the blue star Kachina, and this idea that before this can happen, before this birth of this new world, a great purification takes place within humanity. In the Zulu tradition, I think it was Credo Mutwa, one of their shamans, prophesied this return of Musho Shonono. Now, this was a planet that thousands of years ago came past the Earth and caused the world to turn upside down, caused this great sort of catastrophe, but out of this catastrophe there was born a new world, okay? It's due to return in the year of the Red Bull, 2012. So we're starting to see different prophecies from different tribal traditions correlating. They're all saying a similar kind of thing. Again, with the Maori prophecies, very briefly, their creation myth. Rangi and Papa, the sky and the earth, were together and then eventually forced apart by their offspring. And this let light into the world. And the idea is that they will come back together again. And the particular line of the prophecy, Kahinga Te Arai, was translated initially as the curtain will fall. And everyone thought, oh, that's not good. Because that sounds fairly, final, doesn't it? But then a later translation, when somebody looked back into the old Maori language, came up with this. The veil will dissolve. Altogether a different feeling to that. And there are lots more prophecies, channelings, traditions that point to something happening around this time. Interestingly enough, remote viewers, a lot of people that sort of do remote viewing say there's a block at 2012. They can't get beyond it. When they've looked into the future, they can't see beyond 2012. So lots of people went, we're all going to die. A lot of famous seers, channelers, Edgar Cayce, even people tying up the prophecies in Nostradamus, they're all connected with this time as a time of great change. Of course, in the Christian tradition, we've got the idea of Armageddon, tribulation, these sort of end times, and then the rapture, where everyone will be taken up, believers, that is, will be taken up, and heaven will prevail. And good old crop circles, where would we be without those? Quite a few of the crop circles in recent years, have pointed to either the Mayan calendars or astrological conjunctions and things like that that have always pointed us towards 2012. So we've got this sort of vast set of prophecies from very, very disparate, I mean, I haven't touched on all of them, from very, very disparate sort of tribal traditions from different continents, all the rest of it, that point towards 2012 as an important time and a time of great change. And there are very many theories, more than there are traditions about what might happen. There's just a few of them. Galactic alignment, the idea that the Earth and the Sun and the center of the galaxy are all going to be in alignment on 21st of the 12th, 2012, at the time of the solstice. And incidentally, the solstice happens at 11:11. And of course, those of you that know about the 11:11 phenomenon, people have picked up on that as being a very significant time. This could cause all sorts of physical effects to happen as the theories go. You've got the idea of geomagnetic reversal, that actually the poles of the Earth will actually flip. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Earth will physically flip over, but the North and South Pole will actually sort of change. And there's some evidence to think that that happens on a cyclical event. This might trigger out-of-body experiences, spontaneous telepathy. People have hypothesized that this is a possibility. Even spontaneous evolution of the human race will actually sort of transfer into a higher level. Paul Laviolette came up with this idea of a galactic superwave, that there's a sort of an explosion at the center of the galaxy, sends out these shock waves every few 100,000 years, and that we're due for one now. And if one of these things hit, well, it could be quite sort of disturbing for the human race. We might have a huge EMP pulse, electromagnetic pulse, that knocks out a lot of our infrastructure. Again, causing all sorts of unknown effects. And this ties in with people that have talked about the solar flares and the sunspot cycles. That again, the sun is getting far more active, it's approaching its peak, and we're experiencing those things in terms of weather changes, in terms of all sorts of phenomena, and that might affect us as humanity. We've also got the idea of the return of Nibiru, Planet X. Some people have tied this in with the 2012, okay? That there is this planet on a very, very large orbit that every so often comes into our solar system, and if that planet passes nearby us, it's going to be interesting. The potential for mass upheaval, earthquakes, tsunamis. People have said that the Nibiru is the home of the Anunnaki, and that it will either usher in a new era of galactic understanding, or, as I've read somewhere, perpetual enslavement to our alien overlords, that there'll suddenly, be this kind of mass takeover of the Earth. Some fairly wacky ideas out there. But the essence of it all is that we just don't know, okay? Nobody really knows what's going to happen in 2012. Nobody really knows if anything will occur on that date, on that time, or whether it's part of a continuing process. Now, one of the other things I wanted to look at is the idea of astrology and the astrology of 2012. Because the astrology is a continuing cycle. It doesn't have an end date. But by looking at the astrological charts for 21st of December 2012, we get some clues. Now, I am not an astrologer, okay? But I know a woman who is. Those of you who've seen Helen Sewell's talk on the astrology of 2012, it's amazing. It's very, very revealing, I believe. And I've got Helen to give me a couple of notes here that I'm going to share with you, because I think it's very, very important for the times that we're in. And I think it points towards, if you like, it gives us a pointer towards where things might be going. that is independent of all those prophecies and the various ideas about what's going to happen, okay? So what do we got? That's the chart for Winter Solstice 2012, 11/11, and that's in Greenwich, so it's in the UK, okay? And we've got a number of things going on here. The first is that we've got Pluto in Capricorn, and that is square with Uranus in Aries. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you. Pluto will spend 16 years in Capricorn and first entered the sign fully in 2008, interestingly, because that was the time of the start of the economic crash. Pluto is the planet associated with death, transformation, and rebirth. And when it transits a sign, everything that sign rules comes up for this process. Capricorn, remember Pluto's in Capricorn, the last of the earth signs, rules everything that governs our mundane existence, the physical earth itself, and what it produces, tectonic movements, governments, the establishment in institutions. All these things are coming up for evaluation. And if things need to change, Pluto can be brutal in its exposure of the darkness and transformation into the light. So that certainly rings true for me about where we are at the moment, okay? If you combine that with the idea that this is squared with Uranus in Aries, Uranus is the maverick of the solar system, the revolutionary that seeks the truth, freedom, and utopia. He acts suddenly, often shockingly, overturning the old and decaying and waking us up from our comfortable slumber. Uranus spends 7 years in each sign and entered the warlike sign of Aries in March 2011, coinciding with the Arab Spring becoming much more violent and forceful. Okay? Does that ring true for you? It's interesting, isn't it? And it's the square of these two that's providing us with, if you like, the powder keg for change that may well be happening right now and as we approach the date of the 21st of December. The cycle originally started back in the 60s, and we saw then the whole kind of revolutionary transformation that happened. Okay, the sexual revolution, protests against the war in Vietnam, all of those things that went on. It was a time of great societal upheaval. Well, the square that's happening on the 21st of December, that's the second time that a major alignment has happened with these two. And Helen writes, this square aspect they're forming in the heavens is the first major aspect, and it will feel like the clash of the titans, their opposing forces hitting head on. The raw, libidinal, uncompromising energy of Pluto comes up squarely against the Uranian urge for revolution and freedom. This incredibly potent energy is such a huge opportunity for a leap in consciousness, but it won't be easy. Okay? And I think that's very, very apposite for the times that we're living in at the moment. You've got these two opposing forces, the urge for change and revolution, and Pluto going through Capricorn and causing this upheaval in everything that we know of, really. If you think about it, Capricorn rules all those things of the physical world that we latch onto and hold dear. How is this impacting in global events? Well, I can't go very far without mentioning the Olympics, can I? It's that little thing that's happening today that we've all been building up for 7 years. Also, I think it's interesting, it's a 7-year cycle from when somebody is awarded the Olympics to when it happens. And what happened 7 years ago, just after the Olympics, we had the 7/7 bombings. Just throw that out there as an idea. And if ever there was an example of a society or a government wanting to control something, I think this is a really good example. We're being sold this idea with the Olympics that there's this great sort of event going on, but underneath it all, it just feels like a lockdown almost, okay? I heard Seb Coe on the radio, on Radio 4 the other day, and I nearly threw my muesli across the... Somebody was asking him about the sponsorship. Will you be allowed into the Olympic Stadium if you're wearing a Pepsi T-shirt? Because it's Coke, isn't it? It's Pepsi, yeah. Probably not. What about Nike trainers? Probably would be. They've quickly backtracked on that, of course. And thanks to good old G4S, we've got troops on the streets. We've got rapier missiles on the top of people's tower blocks. You've got gunboats on the Thames, attack helicopters. I noticed on the news the other day, you know the BBC ticker that comes up at the top of the news? There was very briefly on there, jets scrambled to intercept rogue plane, and then it disappeared. Never heard anything more about it. Apparently lost contact with an airliner coming into Heathrow, so they scrambled the jets. I wouldn't want to be flying in and out of London anytime soon, I tell you. But whether it's just a screw-up or whether it's engineered, as some people believe, we now have thousands and thousands of troops on the streets of London. And we also have thousands of brand police. Isn't that a great phrase, brand police? If any of you that don't know this story, there was the Cafe Olympics. It's been in London for donkey's years. It's always been called the Cafe Olympic, and they were told, courtesy of the Olympic Committee, you can't call it that anymore. And I love what this guy's done. He's just painted out the O. So now he's the Cafe Olympic. But it's like, up yours, Olympic Committee. But he's not the only one. There was the butcher in Weymouth who was told to take down his Olympic rings made out of sausages in his thing. There's the hairdressers, no, florists I think they were, that made a beautiful floral display of the Olympic ring. Oh, no, you can't do that. It's this mass sort of, well, not mass, but it's this stealthy kind of incursion of corporate mentality into our everyday lives, okay? And they're wanting to control that. They're wanting to sort of preserve the brand. And you think, well, okay, if you're a sponsor, you might want to preserve your brand, but what good does it do to say you can't have chips from anywhere else but McDonald's? Don't you think it's ironic that McDonald's are sponsoring the Olympics? But what good does it do? Well, it doesn't. It actually kills the very spirit that the Olympics is designed to engender, to me. And there's obviously lots of theories about what's going to happen at the Olympics. I don't know. I really hope that it goes off without a hitch and it's brilliant and it gives everyone a great sense of pride. That's what I hope. And I think it's very important, and we'll be talking more about this in a little while, that we don't buy into the whole fear aspect of what might go wrong, because you hear two people talking with glee, there's going to be carnage. Especially in New Age circles, I always find that very funny. It's going to be death and destruction. It'll be wonderful. We have to be very careful not to actually add to that energy. So that's a sort of example of control. We've also got what's going on in the economic situation about, we were talking about Pluto going through all of our institutions and turning them over. Well, we don't need to look very far to see that things around us are collapsing, the things that we hold dear. They're trying desperately to prop up the euro and the eurozone, but you'd kind of know, like a house of cards, it's just starting to teeter. It's like when you play Jenga and you're trying to think, oh no, but it's all going to fall down, and you know it's going to fall down. There's not a lot you can do about it. And the markets and the fluctuation and the volatility. And of course, this has a real effect on people's lives. People are worried for their livelihoods. People are worried about their future and how this is going to affect your everyday life. But we are seeing the veil is lifting, if you like, on the practices. Those of you that know about this, the Barclays Libor scandal, they're fixing the interest rates. It's a racket. It's not just dodgy practices, it's criminal what's been going on. And everyone has been paying the price for it. So again, this is, the effects moving through of this change. This stuff isn't going to be hidden anymore. And I think these stories are going to get far, far bigger. We're going to realize just what a bunch of shits, quite frankly, all our bankers have been. And then we've got other events. Of course, the so-called Arab Spring that started a few years ago. Yay for democracy, as long as it's American style. This idea that the Arabs are rising up against those people who were dictators, and some of them undoubtedly were dictators. They were nasty people. But are we more stable in the Middle East now because of what they've done? I think that's very, very debatable. And of course, wrong way. Syria is where it's all happening at the moment. And Bashar al-Assad, he was a fairly fated leader a few years ago. He managed to keep Syria fairly stable, good man to do business with. And now he is the boogeyman. He's got to be removed at all costs. And of course, there are very, very searching questions to be asked about the whole insurgency that's going on there. We're told it's a revolution of the people. We're told that this is what they want. Yeah? And actually, if you look at some of the alternative press, and by that I don't mean fringe sites that we would go and look at and things like that, and conspiracy sites. I'm talking about things like Russia Today. If you want to get an interesting perspective on the world, start looking at Russia Today, okay? It is undoubtedly partisan, just as anyone else is, somebody pays for them, but some of the stuff they cover is really interesting, and you get a viewpoint and an insight that you just do not get on mainstream UK news channels, okay? If you look at their feeds that are coming out, it's not so black and white, okay? And the potential for instability out there is huge. Well, why is that? I think that this has got something to do with it. I think that the powers that be are they're spoiling for a fight with the next boogeyman, okay? And you're seeing a huge increase in the media of stories about what a bunch of bastards Iran are, okay? You're seeing, the very convenient bombing in Bulgaria. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that they didn't do it or they weren't responsible for it. I don't know. But I think in keeping an open mind about who might be behind it, because the speed with which Netanyahu pointed the finger at Iran, there's no evidence. He actually said, we don't need to, we know who it was. And we, as the public, and I'm talking about the public at large, buy that. And we just go, okay, yeah, it was Iran. There's just a few examples of the events that are going on in the world at the moment. And I think that anybody that looks at world events can see that we are heading towards a point. Disregard all the 2012 prophecy stuff. Disregard all of that. And just look at what's happening on the ground. And I think we're seeing a focus on a point in the future whereby we're thinking this is pretty unsustainable. The Hopis have a word for it. It's koyaanisqatsi, which is also the title of a wonderful film that you all should see if you get a chance to. And it's variously translated as life in chaos, life out of balance, or the one I like, which is a way of life which calls for a new way of living. And I think that under the collective of humanity, we kind of know that we're going wrong. We know we're going down a street that's kind of, not really where we want to be. We're in the bad side of town, okay? And that's manifesting itself in a number of ways. We've got the sort of increase in people seeking oblivion, really, through all sorts of means. I think that there's a bit of a spiritual malaise, especially in England. And I think that ties into some of the ideas that Steiner had about the English and their susceptibility towards materialism, where you're seeing a whole generation of young people who basically don't really know what their purpose is in life and what they want to do. And then on the other side of it, you're seeing people that are seeking the idea of salvation. come and get me out of this. Rescue us. I don't want to have to deal with it anymore. And interestingly enough, I think there is a bit of an upsurge in people that are exiting the planet of their own volition because they've had enough. They can't cope with the changes that are going on. In New Age circles, in metaphysical circles, we've got the idea of ascension that still floats around. Now, this was very big in the 90s, obviously. The thought that they, whoever they are going to come and rescue us. They're going to come and take us off the planet in their spaceships. They're going to come and help us to ascend, to turn into beings of light, whatever. And the subtext of that is actually we won't really have to go through much hard work. You know, it might be a bit uncomfortable for a few days. You know, what to pack on the spaceship. But it's about giving your responsibility over to somebody else. And of course, the Christian tradition is no different. Isn't that lovely? It's wholesome, isn't it? The whole family rising from the dead on the day of judgment. And there are some people who are so convinced that 2012 is going to be this nexus point that on 11/11, on the 21st of December 2012, the world will change in the blink of an eye. And we will suddenly find ourselves in a different dimension, on a different sort of plane of existence. There's actually a guy in America who is planning to jump off a rock. So convinced is he that he will suddenly blink into another dimensional reality at that point. Okay? I think he might do, but not in the way that he thinks. I think there could be, you know that moment when Wile E. Coyote runs off the edge of the cliff? That look of, on his face. So, incidentally, this is not him practicing. Well, it might be him practicing, I don't know. That's the only way I'd do. No, I wouldn't even do that. I haven't got the courage to do that. But so this idea of salvation, and going back to Helen's work on the astrology, this is also represented in the chart for 2012. Okay? What have we got here? We have got Neptune conjunct Chiron on the ascendant. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? But I'll tell you what that means. Neptune has returned home to its own sign of Pisces after 165 years and will spend the next 14 years in that sign. It's powerfully placed on the ascendant of England's chart at the moment of the solstice. The planets all have light and dark side, and therefore its effects could manifest either way. Neptune rules the spiritual, our connection to the numinous, and where we seek redemption. This will help dissolve the veil and bring looking at the higher perspective into sharp relief and stimulate a new fervour in the collective longing to connect to other worlds beyond this one or return back to the source. Okay? I think that keys in very nicely with this idea of salvation, of somebody coming to save us, somebody coming to get us out of this mess. However, because Neptune is conjunct Chiron, the wounded healer, this could be pertinently reflective of collective disillusionment and disappointment when people who have definite expectation of what 2012 means fail to get their dreams realized. And I think that is a key for where we are at the moment, because there are a lot of people placing an awful lot of store in something big happening at that time, on that day. And what happens if you wake up on the 22nd of December 2012 and the world looks much the same, and John Humphreys is on Radio 4, or no, Chris Moores won't be on Radio 2, which is Radio 1, which is a great thing, but everything is just as it was. How are you going to feel? For me, my feeling about 2012 is that it is a continuum. It's not a one-off event. Now, I might be wrong. something might happen that's spectacular. And I think it's how we reconcile these two ideas, the fact that something could happen that's spectacular and the fact that something might not happen and everything just goes on in the same way. That's part of the key to how we get through all this. I want to take a little digression here, a little wander off into a different area. Because I think that we've talked about the idea of revolution and change and people wanting change and the fervour for that. And I think that's manifested itself in a number of ways over the last year or so. And we're just going to have a little look at some of those ideas. Who of you know what this is all about? You can't have failed to miss it if you're on YouTube or anything on the internet like that. Coney 2012. Anyone sign up for the campaign? Anyone admit to signing up? Okay, that's fair enough. A lot of people did. For those of you not familiar with it, Joseph Kony, one of the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, okay? Utterly nasty bloke, responsible for lots of murder, rape, pillaged, child soldiers being enlisted and all the rest of it. Okay, and this, out of nowhere, this Kony 2012 campaign came into the public consciousness. It was all over the social media, okay? People were tweeting about it, people were sending YouTube links, and there was a video that went viral, a documentary video that went viral, basically saying, this guy's nasty, we should get him, okay? And that video was made by, come on, change, this bunch of people, Invisible Children. Ignore the fascist-looking salute, I'm sure it's nothing intentional at all, and the costumes and the whole thing. Turned out to be a essentially evangelical Christian organisation, a campaigning organisation that were behind this video, and their leader was this, oops, shouldn't have done that. Their leader was this guy, Jason Russell, okay, very charismatic, very photogenic, and he was very, very prolific. You couldn't get away from him at one point on terms of interviews and things like that. And this whole campaign of enlisting through the social media people to stop Kony, to have him arrested, basically. But then some unusual things started happening. A few of the more questioning press actually went to Uganda and said, well, what's this all about then? And the Ugandans went, well, I don't know, he hasn't been around for years, you know, the Lord's Resistance Army has shrunk, there's only a few hundred of them, and actually we're quite pissed off that people are digging all this up again. You know, we're going through a healing process here. We're actually sorting ourselves out and coming to some terms of what happened, and you've just come in and, you know, you've raked it all up again. And actually when they showed a recut version of the film in a stadium in Uganda, there was a riot. They were so mad at it, because to them it was like, you know, typical bloody white people coming in, telling us what we need to do, and actually we're getting on with sorting out our problems. Well, then the news came out that oil had been discovered in Uganda. Coincidence? So a lot of people started to connect the two together. This whipping up a fervour of, we must intervene. We must stop this man because he's taking these children and he's raping these women and he's, yeah, okay? And of course, people started to get cynical about it. Anyone that's familiar with sort of memes on the internet and these sort of demotivational posters and things like that, it spread like wildfire across it. So you started to get the jokes arriving. Kony 2012 proving that 99% of YouTubers believe exactly what a video tells them. Okay? And the one I love, the Gene Wilder in Willy Wonka. So, tell me more about the newfound oil in Uganda. People were very, very quick to catch on, and I think this is a phenomenon that will only grow because the interconnectedness now that is starting to happen in terms of technological interconnectedness and the speed with which information can be transferred between people, okay? The flip side is, the downside of that is that something like Kony campaign can happen and everybody goes, let's get angry about it. What are we getting angry? I don't know. Let's just get angry about it. Okay? And they don't question. But when people start questioning it equally quickly, we're seeing the counteraction of that. Okay? What that's done in some people is that it's promoted a great deal of cynicism about these things. And in some cases, cynicism can be healthy. As long as you don't write everything off, if it causes you to act with more discernment, looking at the world through a slightly cynical eye can be a healthy way of questioning what's going on and what we're being fed. Okay? But there's also campaigns that I think are important and going to be important. Those of you who are on Facebook regularly and use other social media might have come across this. There's a graphic designer, this isn't him, this is just one of the posters, a graphic designer in Israel started to get really, really cheesed off about the war drums that are beating out there. And they are beating hard, far more in Israel than we would know in this country, okay? So he just started this campaign. He just put a poster of himself up, and it just said, Iranians, we will never bomb your country, we love you. And he blogged about it, and he said, you know, I've never met a nasty Iranian. I've met a couple of Iranian guys once when I was on holiday. They were great. They were really nice. Why would I want to bomb them? And this campaign has started to build now and build. People are just taking photographs of themselves and putting up posters saying, we will never bomb you. Now, I'm sure Benjamin Netanyahu is not quaking in his boots at this. But nevertheless, what it's showing is that there is a contrary viewpoint to what's being fed people in the media. That people aren't necessarily going to take the idea of Israel attacking Iran or America attacking Iran on behalf of Israel or whatever, lying down. They want to stop it. And it wasn't long before it came back the other way. The Iranians started to do the same thing. Israelis, we do not want a nuclear bomb. We want peace and democracy. We are your friends. Okay? And I think this is very powerful, what's going on here. That ordinary people are bypassing. And they can do so now because the tools enable them to do it. They can do it in a way which is quite sophisticated. It's not just about sort of writing a poster and standing outside. It's about, you know, you see some of these protest sites. They're incredibly sophisticated. The films that are made, videos that are put together, they're very professional. They're not amateur productions anymore. And people can do this. And using social media and using the power of the internet, they can actually start to change ideas and change consciousness. And we see that in this country as well. Going back to the Olympics, we've got various organisations that, you know, Avaz, 38 Degrees, some of you might belong to them. 38 Degrees is a sort of UK-based campaigning group. And they've been trying to put pressure on the Olympic tax dodgers that we're going to use a particular clause in the rules of the Olympics to enable them not to pay any tax, which is good of them. This was a recent update, 5 down. So they managed to put enough pressure on McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Eon, something, Visa, and General Electric. And I know that there are more who've now sort of said, yeah, okay, we'll pay our tax. Bastards. Some other events that I found interesting. How do we connect Premier League football, the DNA, and the Large Hadron Collider? This is a little freewheeling here. But, anyone know this guy? Fabrice Muamba. I think he plays... Now, I'm going to make myself look stupid here because I know bugger all about football, frankly. It's not my game. But he was playing in a match. He plays for Bolton, doesn't he? I think it was a Bolton-Tottenham match. And he collapsed in the middle of the match. Okay? Now, footballers get injuries, but quite quickly it became obvious that this was going to be serious. Paramedics were there. He was very fortunate to have, you know, all the medical aid he needed right on hand. But understandably, as time went on, it was incredibly traumatic. And the crowd were obviously in the stadium. The match was stopped. And it went on for a long time, this process of sort of trying to revive him. People knew it was serious, and I think word spread quite quickly because they could see people doing CPR on him and things like that, that it wasn't good. And it was very traumatic for everybody involved. And people did an unusual thing. Obviously, some of the players there have a faith, have a belief, and they were openly praying. People in the crowd were praying for him. And where I'm going with this is that I think this was a very interesting phenomenon because you had headlines in mainstream newspapers saying, pray for him. Now, his heart stopped for 78 minutes. He was technically dead for 78 minutes, okay? And I'm just putting an idea out here, but maybe having a stadium full of people willing you to get better, absolutely willing you to get better. Is this my 10 minutes? Oh, God, that's worrying. Is actually going to have a positive effect because he got better. They managed to stabilize him, get him into hospital. I'm going to try and rip through this now because we've got a lot to cover. And he was on life support for a while. And then his wife did an interesting thing. She used social media to actually exhort people to pray for him. And this is where this whole pray for him thing came from. So you had a nation of people, even football supporters, even if they haven't got a faith, you know, and a lot of people who say, oh, I'm an atheist, you know, I don't believe in God or anything. As soon as stuff gets tough, they start to pray to God. But it doesn't matter. It's about the intent. It's about the thought. You had a nation, not a nation of people, but a large number of people actually sort of willing this guy to get better. And he did. He made a miraculous recovery, as the doctors stated it. He was out of intensive care quite quickly. He was up and about talking. And I think didn't he recently just carry the Olympic torch on a leg of the Olympic torch? Yeah. So, you know, that's remarkable. Now, okay, you can say he was very fit and so he was in, you know, the best possible shape to actually... But they found out he had a heart defect that nobody knew about. I think that the power of focused intent in this case actually went a long way into maybe speeding his recovery and aiding him. How's this connected with DNA? Well, there's some interesting studies being done recently looking into how cells communicate with one another, how they actually get one another to do things like sort of, oh, there's been a damage here, let's start repairing and stuff like that. And one of the things that they're looking for and looking at is the idea that cells communicate using light. That actually they emit light, and that the emission of that light is how cells communicate on that level. Now, this is really sort of cutting-edge stuff. You know, it's still all up for conjecture, but I think it's fascinating that science is tying in with the whole New Age idea of a light body. You know, to me, I can make a correlation between the two in my mind. I can think, okay, you know, science is moving into a sphere now, and this has been doing for a long time, where those huge changes and the ideas that we've put forward in the metaphysical arena for a very long time are starting to come about. And obviously, I think it's no coincidence that we've discovered the Higgs boson. I think this is going to be a huge, huge leap in consciousness in terms of scientific discovery. This Higgs boson, the idea that this is a particle that, you know, the so-called God particle, and do scientists hate it when you call it that, is actually starting, you know, they've discovered it, it's there as far as they know, and it's going to start to put the theories together that actually points towards the interconnectedness of all things, okay? So I think you can trace a line from the footballer having his heart attack to the Higgs boson, because what it does to me is it points towards this idea of interconnectedness and the fact that we are not separate and that we are not sort of separate entities from our universe. And I think that 2012, if it is about anything for me, it's about that idea. that we're moving into a sphere where all sorts of things on the planet that are happening are starting to awaken us, okay? We've got the technological revolution that's going on in terms of our interconnectedness technologically. We've got the revolutions in science that are going on that are pointing towards that very interconnectedness, okay? And we have the metaphysical ideas that we will, at some point, evolve and have far more interconnectedness with one another. And I think it's no coincidence that these things are happening in 2012, that we've got a confluence of ideas, if you like, okay? And how we cope with those, that confluence of ideas, whatever might happen, because a lot of us, you know, there's all this conjecture about what might go on in 2012. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But in order to cope with whatever might throw at us, whether it's on the 3D Earth level or whether it's something far more transformatory and far more metaphysical than that, I think it's about the old cliche. It's about getting the heart right, okay? And meeting whatever comes with our heart center open so that we can take the best out of any situations that arise, and making sure that we don't feed into the fear that's being sort of talked about in 2012 circles, and at the same time don't go the other way and decide that we're all going to be taken off and everything's going to be okay and it's going to be fine. I think there's a lot of hard work ahead as we move into this time of change, and I think it's very much up to us as to how we meet those challenges and go forwards. And I just wanted to leave you with a little quote, which I think is very apposite for the times we're living in. And I was really disappointed to learn that this quote wasn't spoken by Nelson Mandela in his inaugural speech. Some of you know which one it is. Read it. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, or fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. So I'll leave you with that thought. Have a great rest of conference and enjoy. Thank you.
Jason Porthouse, thank you very much. Fabulous start. Perfect. Thank you.